It was the brutal winter of 1978 when a Labour government led by James Callaghan governed a Britain shaken by the trade unions, rampant inflation and general political turmoil. That very winter prompted the infamous headline by the then editor of The Sun, Larry Lamb, "The Winter of Discontent." Incidentally, the winter of discontent was made glorious summer by this son of York, so perhaps Sunak will be the son of York. But as we've had a tumultuous year of strikes, inflation and some might say some political disarray, do we find ourselves in a similar situation to those years of the late 1970s? Well, who better to have with me than Larry Lamb's successor, Mr. Kelvin MacKenzie, along with author and journalist Matthew Stadlen. Kelvin, I'd better come to you first. Is this a summer of discontent? Is it reminiscent of 1978, 1979?
Not really, no. I mean, I obviously lived through that period, and that was an absolute nightmare. However, the difference this time is this was a Labour government that got it all wrong in the 70s. This one is a Conservative government. And honestly, Jacob, you are one of those that are responsible for this. You sat there in a cabinet while, honestly, we had a Prime Minister who decided to give money away. Remember, he was a former editor of The Spectator. He couldn't tell a balance sheet from a roll of cheese, right? And he just gave billions away. Billions that wasn't matched by production. You said, oh, you sit at home, take money, take 80% of your thing. Then after that, every shopkeeper in the country can come up with some kind of turnover which said you're entitled to 50,000 quid, right? We didn't produce anything at all. Nothing happened. What did you do about it? Did you feel so angry that you resigned from the government?
No,
Did you feel angry enough to actually quit the Conservative Party?
I thought that when we locked down, we couldn't bankrupt people when the government had ordered them to lock down. That if the government orders a lockdown, which certainly the first one I thought was right, you have to compensate people.
Jacob, good to be on your show. Thank you
for coming.
It's also important to point out, I'm afraid, and I thought I was going to be taking on both of you this evening, but it seems that for the moment we're both taking you on because you're also Business Secretary during one of the most disastrous administrations in British history. That's the Liz Truss government, which lasted barely more than a month. And you were sitting there as a member of the Cabinet, collective responsibility, as Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng destroyed the British economy. Now, you can point to Ukraine, of course you can, and the tragedy of what's going on there. You can point, of course, to the pandemic. Let's leave Brexit out of it for the moment. But you have to take some responsibility for where we are now yourself.
Well, of course, anyone who's been in government has to take some responsibility. But actually, the real issue last September was once again the Bank of England failing to increase interest rates at that point. You had the Federal Reserve going faster than the Bank of England. The Bank of England didn't do it. Yeah. The currency collapsed. This did coincide with Kwasi's mini budget,
there were things,
but it was the bank that was failing.
There are things essentially wrong with our country, right? Working from home is a disaster. We have no productivity, right? Even Greece, by the way.
And I did try and stop that, if you'll give me a little bit of credit.
Yes, OK, I'll give you some credit. Right, so working from home is a disaster. People are doing less. Our productivity is going down at a moment we need to go up. If we want to pay any of our debts off, we have to work harder. We are idle. We are over-unionised. And nobody is prepared. And your government is a very... I know this is... Matthew will probably think this is amazing. This is a very, very liberal government. You've got a problem, here's a cheque. You've got a problem, here's a cheque. Benefit payments, as you know, that 10%, right, yes, have gone through the roof and was blamed. One of the things that was blamed, which is about the only thing I really agree with one of the reasons, was the reason why inflation stayed the same. So we are paying out money we do not possess. And this is a crisis which isn't going to end, as Rishi says, at the end of this year. Be right through to the election. Honestly, Jacob, you are done for. You will lose your seat in all this.
Jacob, it's very important to point out, because you rightly brought up the winter of discontent. I don't think we're quite where we were then. I was born at the end of 1979, so for the first 18 years of my life, it was a Tory government.
You lived in that golden age, the first 18 years of
Why
your
was
life?
there a Tory government? At least in the early years, there was a Tory government precisely because of the winter of discontent. When inflation is rampant, when people are suffering not just because of the cost of living, but because of corrective measures to try to bring down inflation, which then hits them doubly if they have a mortgage. Who are they going... Let me just quickly finish the point. Who are they going to blame, Jacob. You're being attacked on the right. You're being criticised on the left. You remember the phrase, as a historian of British politics, it's the economy stupid. Fast forward to the next general election, whenever we are granted one, and I predict that the Tories are going to get a hammering, because people, this is the last point, people will ask themselves, was I better off in 2019 or even 2010 than I am now? And they'll probably say, most of your viewers will probably say yes. Under those circumstances, how can they vote for your party?
That's a different issue, really. I think the consequences of economic policy are profound politically, but it's trying to work out what the causes are. And you mentioned Liz Truss, and I think, although it was handled badly, although things went wrong, but idiotic of me to pretend otherwise, actually what she was going for, economic growth and supply-side reforms, a healthier economy with deregulation, was the one way of helping with the inflation.
We aren't producing. But that Brexit, I agree with this the chap on one of your mailbox, right, who described Brexit as a disaster. You must accept, even a year into it, and by the way, we're now 7 years since we voted for it, that had we known that this was going to happen, right, there would not have been a majority.
I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all. That we
give me one example of how it's worked for the economy. Let's talk
we've
about
saved
the economy.
£191 billion, £191 billion by not being part of the EU's
What, do you mean? Do you mean the annual payment? You mean?
No, £191 billion of extra payment that the EU has taken on because of its COVID recovery plan of €2 trillion.
Jacob, I'll say one thing in your favour. I'll say one thing in your favour, and that is that exports, global exports, British global exports, seem to be at a record high. Now, the question, of course, is, would they have been at a record high had we not Brexited? But let me just put this question to you, because I think it's a valid one. You won that referendum because you had a coalition. You had Boris Johnson, you had some on the left, you had Jeremy Corbyn dragging his feet, but you also had another very key participant, ally, and that was Nigel Farage. He has just vacated this very studio. He said a few weeks ago he is disappointed with how Brexit has gone. Where do you stand? Are you happy with where Brexit is at the moment? Because you were in charge of the effects of Brexit, Brexit.
I was in charge of the Retained EU law bill, which the government gutted, which was the best way of getting the deregulation that we need to get some economic growth. We're going to have to come back. We'll probably discuss Brexit tomorrow. But thank you to my panel.